Y sí, que se sienta el contrapeso. Voy a hablar de mi pasado. Voy a hablarles de mi vida, no todo es lo que parece, yo también he batallado. Yo vengo de gente humilde y hay muchos momentos tristes, imposibles de olvidarlos.
Hola, welcome to the Los Tres Grandes de la Sierra podcast. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the rich history and culture of the Chicano people.
Okay, so Carson, what does Chicano mean?
Okay, so Chicano is a term that refers to people of Mexican-American descent, and the Chicano movement was a civil rights movement that began in the 1960s, specifically for Chicano people. Chicano history is filled with stories of struggle, perseverance, and also pride.
Whoa, Carson, you're going a little fast there. Let's back it up a little bit. To understand Chicano history properly, we need to start at the beginning. Mexicans have been living in what is now the United States since before it was even a country. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican-American War in 1848, transferred a large portion of Mexican territory to the United States. This includes what is now known as California, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Colorado, Wyoming, Kansas, and Oklahoma.
So if you can imagine, all the people who came from Mexico were living in that portion. It was no longer Mexico. So once the U.S. took over that territory, they were now living in U.S. territory, so they were out of place.
This time legally, though.
Yeah, like you guys are saying, the American government did not recognize the rights of Mexicans who had lived in these territories for generations. Mexicans were treated as second-class citizens. They didn't have land ownership, and they were often discriminated against, and there was a lot of violence tied to them.
Now you fast forward to the 1960s, and the civil rights movement was making a lot of noise, and the Chicano people wanted a peace. Mexican Americans began to push back against this injustice, and so the Chicano movement was born. It fought for the rights of Mexican Americans and celebrated their culture.
One of the most significant events of the Chicano movement was the 1968 student walkouts in Los Angeles. Mexican-American students demanded better education, equal treatment, and an end to discrimination in schools. This event sparked similar protests across the country and led to important changes in education policy.
These Chicano movements also have largely impacted the arts. Chicano artists, writers, and musicians created a new cultural movement that celebrated the Mexican-American experience. The music artists like Carlos Santana and Richie Valens became hugely popular, and Chicano art began to gain more recognition in museums and galleries.
And on the topic of Chicano culture, one could argue that American culture in the Southwest was very heavily influenced and pretty much directly created from Chicano culture.
That's right.
However, the Chicano movement was not without its challenges. Mexican Americans faced discrimination and violence, and the movement was often met with resistance from the government and mainstream society. But despite these obstacles, they persevered. The movement paved the way for future generations of Mexican Americans to fight for their rights and celebrate their culture.
That's all for today's episode. We hope you enjoyed this look into Chicano history. Join us next time as we explore more fascinating stories from the past.
Todos sabían que era pistolero, ya todos sabían que era muy valiente, por eso las leyes mi tiempo le dieron, el día que a mansalva y cobardemente le dieron la muerte.